Hello and welcome back to today's video. Today we're going to be taking a first look at the new upcoming Tier 9 reward heavy tank, the TT-130M. It's going to be available in the first Battle Pass of the year, coming in March, and it's the first Czech heavy tank with rocket boosters, so let's have a look at it. So let's have a look at the statistics for the TT-130M. This tank's looking pretty interesting, but do bear in mind all of these statistics are subject to change prior to this tank being released. But this tank's looking a little bit like a combination of a Skoda T56, the Tier 8 Czech Premium, and the 122TM, the Chinese Tier 8 Medium Premium, in terms of it has a similar kind of profile in terms of look, armor model to the Skoda, but a similar kind of gun mechanics to the 122TM. So, to put that into perspective, its DPM is looking kind of lacking. Less than 2,100 base, that's going to be pretty poor. You are definitely going to struggle to kind of trade effectively, but you do have 490 alpha to help with that. But for every shot, you are going to be reloading for 14 seconds base, which is a long time. That's the similar bit to the 122TM. This tank has pretty poor gun handling stats, base. 0.38 dispersion is definitely pretty poor. You are going to feel the gun is pretty derpy. It may be pretty good close range, especially, you are going to be hitting for 490, but anything on longer than 100 meters, you are definitely going to be struggling. This tank is not going to be a sniper. But the most interesting thing with this tank is its rocket booster mechanics. This thing, without the rocket booster, goes 30 kph forward, but with the rocket booster goes 45. It's a pretty significant increase. We don't know quite what the field mods are going to do to it yet, but it could have a similar field mod to the new BZ72-1, which came out in the latest auction, where if you take it, you could potentially increase that top speed with the rocket booster up to 50 plus, which would make this a pretty quick heavy tank. You are definitely going to be able to get into position, even if it doesn't have that field mod, with 45. This thing has pretty good armor, which we are going to look at in a second. I'll pull up a model and we'll go on Tanks GG and we'll look at the model and I'll show you the armor. But based on this tank's raw statistics, it's looking kind of mediocre. It's not going to it's definitely not going to be overpowered, but it's definitely looking interesting, but definitely balanced. So let's have a bit of a look at that armor model. So as we've seen, the stats looking mediocre, but the armor is where this thing is going to excel a little bit. So if we look at this tank base, we look at the visual, you do see how it looks like the Skoda T56 or the VZ55. It very much is a Czech heavy tank. It has this fixed spaced armor and it has the one cupola, which if you go onto the live and we look at its actual armor, is definitely going to be the weak point of this tank. 201 millimeters though for a cupola is pretty thick. So, if you are going to be playing against, tier 7 tanks, which you will because this is tier 9, some tier 7 tanks will, especially the mediums, will struggle to pen your cupola at times, especially if they hit the outer edges where, it gets up to 230 in places. But in general, that is going to be the weak point. Yes, you do have a little bit of a vision port at the back, which is weaker, but, there shouldn't really ever be a situation where you have to shoot this instead of this. But this tank kind of has its party trick in the terms of its turret is very thick, pretty much unpenetratable in places. If you were to fire heat at it, there's potential you could shoot here and potentially overmatch, which we'll look at in a second. Yeah, you have a little viewpoint, weak point here. But if you can see that, shoot the cupola, it's going to be much easier. If you do have high gold pen, there is the lower parts of the turret, which you can definitely shoot, which are going to be weak points. But once again, it's going to be pretty hard to hit. There's no real blatant weak points on this tank's turret. Its hull armor is still pretty strong. If you have gold pen, you are going to be punching through it. It does have spaced armor, so you are going to have to be aware of that. But, it does get up to 300 mil in places, so definitely the frontal armor, especially towards the top, is going to be very strong against tier 7, tier 8 kind of tanks. This tank has a weak lower plate. It's weak from pretty much all angles, apart from pretty extreme. So do be aware of that. It can side scrape, but if it's side scraping, you are going to have to be aware that this kind of frontal hull is definitely going to be weak. But you can over angle this tank pretty effectively, unless, if you can kind of peek your rear around, you could maybe bake a few shots, but your front drive wheel is definitely going to be pennable. You are going to definitely, bounce some shots and ricochet some shots off here. Your engine deck, if they do get above you, however, is overmatchable, so you are going to have to be careful of side scraping against tall tanks. And once again, if they can't pen you here, they are just going to shoot you here, which is definitely just going to be a weak point. But in general, this tank's armor is looking pretty strong, pretty similar to the Skoda T56. When it does side scrape, it can be penned here. Has a cupola, which is definitely not small, and it can't really play a ridgeline because it only has 5 degrees of gun depression, which is definitely going to limit this tank because you can still see the cupola even when using the gun depression. So, let's go on to a little bit of a conclusion where I'll give you my overall opinion on whether you should pick up this tank from the new upcoming Battle Pass. So, should you get this tank? This tank is definitely not going to be cheap. You are going to have to be shelling out 28 Battle Pass tokens to get this tank, especially as it's going to be the new one in the game. Should you get it? If you don't have the Cobra, no, get the Cobra, because that thing is just stupidly overpowered. But if you've picked up the Cobra, and you've picked up everything else, and you're fancying, maybe getting this as a crew trainer for the VZ55 line if you don't have the Skoda, yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's definitely not going to be broken, but it's definitely not going to be terrible. This tank is pretty balanced, but it's definitely not going to, be the overall just beast that the Cobra is. So, my conclusion, if you haven't got the Cobra, get the Cobra instead of this. If you have the Cobra and everything else, yeah, consider picking this up because, a good player will be able to do pretty good in this tank. You just have to be aware of mitigating this tank's weaknesses, which is its cupola and the lack of DPM and pretty poor gun handling. But if you did like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We're going for 1,000 by June. Pretty achievable, I reckon. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.